My name is Maria, and you're listening to the podcast where we deconstruct someone's PhD experience so that you can reconstruct your own. This is a journey with many challenges, but you might find yourself in a similar situation as one of the guests here. Enjoy listening. Buddy, it's been now some time ago, but how about starting with your first PhD experience? Because you quit your first PhD.
Yes, I don't think there's many people who can say they've had a first PhD experience, because of course that insinuates there was a second one or even a third one. Indeed, I have a first PhD experience. I completed my bachelor's degree in September 2001. In fact, I graduated on September 11th, 2001. So 9/11. I can remember quite clearly the feeling that day when we were celebrating the drinks at the University of Limerick in Ireland after the graduation, and somebody coming in and telling us what had just happened in New York City. So that's absolutely crystal clear. So I remember that day very, very well. And 4 weeks later, I had committed to moving to the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. And I was going to be undertaking a PhD in the world of cosmology. My bachelor's degree was in applied physics, but I had this interest in astrophysics, in astronomy, in cosmology that I really wanted to follow and really wanted to see where it could go. I applied for a number of positions in the UK. I was offered this one at the University of Sussex and found myself living in Brighton from early October 2001. And I think it was at the time, I was very much invested in that area, in that field. Right now, I would say that it's something that I find interesting, but not something that I would have dedicated years and years to at this stage of my life. But when I was younger, I thought, that's what I want to do. I'm going to do this. So I did that and went to England, and very quickly things started to not go as planned. Let's put it that way.
And for you, it was clear that you want to do a PhD. When you said, I want to do this, I want to do cosmology, it was really specific PhD in cosmology.
Yes, yeah, cosmology or even astrophysics. They were the type of PhDs I was looking at. I had in my bachelor's degree at the University of Limerick, my final year project was on galaxy formation and something called self-organized criticality. The idea that in systems, there's a kind of a self-organization for certain processes and certain things to happen. And when you reach something called a critical point, you start to see scaleless behavior, where you start to see events of all sizes, and that could be of all length, scales, and duration. And something that tends to follow this kind of scaleless behavior and it's characterized by power laws would be something like earthquakes. That would be an example that people probably know of. But I tried to investigate that in galaxies, and I loved doing that project because I was combining my interest as a physicist with my interest in things I was studying outside of the university at the time, which was astronomy and astrophysics. It was not part of my degree, and I brought it in to my project. And it was a natural choice. And I applied for a number of positions at a number of universities both in Ireland and the UK. And I remember sending off a lot of applications. And then one came back and I got it. And I was delighted to go there. And I went there with huge excitement, a little trepidation as well, because it was my first time living away from home. Literally, I'd always just lived at home. So it was the first time I was moving away, and I was also moving out of Ireland and moving to England. And of course, a lot of people would say Ireland and England quite similar. They're not, to be honest. They're not. There's a lot of differences between the two. Really are.
So I'm curious about the details, what the differences are, but maybe in the scope of this topic to stick to the PhD. How did this experience go?
I think the cultural element would have been something that contributed as well. So I'd like to highlight that you move from one country to another, and of course there's the cultural aspect. There was a lot of commonality, but there are a lot of big differences in between Ireland and England. However, in relation to the research itself, the research, I think what happened very quickly is that I realized that it wasn't as stimulated by it as I thought it would be. I still liked it, but I also was asking myself kind of forward-looking questions about where could this go and what am I going to do with this? And is this something that I want to do for my career for the rest of my life? And I found it also very difficult to settle. At the time, I would say, poor self-discipline. I traveled back to Ireland a lot. And that was also, when I look back, probably detrimental towards the process of adapting and trying to see if I could fit in to the role and to the research. But I think even when I was doing it, while I still found it interesting, I still felt distance between myself and the topic and the content. And I thought that it would get close. I thought I was going to get closer and closer to it, and it didn't happen. And I had a 3-year contract with 3 years of funding. So I had to make a decision quite quickly about what I was going to do. I didn't want to waste my time. I didn't want to waste the time of my promoter of the department I was at the university. And it also comes down to money as well, because it would have cost money for both parties for it to continue longer than it should have. And there are lots of people who will stick out something to the end just because they feel like that they're going to be disappointing people, or they're going to be disappointing themselves, or that they also have the financial issues that could be incorporated into this. But I was very pragmatic about how I looked at things. I was young, I was 22. I sat down and I thought, right, do I want to be here when I'm 24, 25? And the answer was no. And it was very easy then. And within, I think, probably February of 2002, I was almost sure I was going to leave. And I had a conversation with my promoter, and he said, look, give it, just see what happens. Just give it a few more weeks. So I did. And those few weeks did go really well. I have to admit, I did enjoy it, but it didn't change my mind. And I made the decision in March 2002, and I left in mid-April 2002. And that was just over 6 months after starting in the position.
And so you had a clear idea what you did not want to do at that point? And was it clear for you in which direction to go?
I'm going to say no. I didn't have a very clear idea of what I wanted to achieve after I decided that this wasn't for me anymore. I went back to Ireland. That was the direction I took. I ended up just taking a role working. Actually, I was working in a call center, just doing data entry. That's what I was doing. And that was only for a month. And then I got a role in industry where I had done a work experience before. So I worked for a company called Analog Devices in Limerick. And I had been in contact with my boss from there. And I said, look, I was very interested in going back in a temporary role. They had something and they gave me that. That was absolutely fantastic to be able to use that time. So I never saw it as time that I wasted. But when I did come back, I did immediately start to try and find another position in Ireland in the same area. And the thing which hindered that was there was no funding at those institutes or universities that would facilitate me. And I think that was probably a blessing, because that would have been a rush. And that would have perhaps been too fast to go back. And I think when I was younger, when I was in my early 20s, I had this idea that I had to be doing something. I had to be following the path, this linear path towards that particular goal. But, when I look back now, it was good that I didn't, because there was a lot more other things came out of it, a lot more life lessons that I probably would have missed out on if I had simply been lucky enough as many people might view it, to have gone directly from one position straight into another and try and kickstart the whole process again. It was good to take time away from it and to reassess and to figure out what I really wanted. And then a year and a half after I left a PhD, I started a PhD.
There are two things I want to go back on. One thing that you say, you feel like you had to do it. That's an interesting one. Like when we are in this kind of perpetuum mobile in academia, you go bachelor, you go master, and then it's kind of a natural next step that you're going to go for a PhD. But if there is no strong motivation to say, yes, I really want to do this, like no matter what, this is absolutely what I want. Maybe it's not the best thing to do afterwards, because PhD is totally different than bachelor and master. In a sense that in bachelor and master, you're being guided. So like, there's a professor, he is setting up the rules, how courses look like, when the exams are, and none of this structure exists afterwards in PhD. You go there and you are supposed to be your own boss and decide your own deadlines and figure out how to do stuff.
Sure. Agreed. Indeed, when you enter the world of the PhD, you don't have that guidance from your mentor, whoever she or he is, in terms of taking you down that road towards a result, because there's a lot of work you have to do by yourself, and it can be quite lonesome and it could be quite taxing. But in saying that, I did also apply to do other courses. So I thought about doing a grad diploma in computational physics or numerical modeling. I looked at also becoming a secondary school teacher. So I didn't close different options. I didn't close the doors to those. I still considered them and explored them and thought that maybe this is something I should also look at. But over the 18 months or so between leaving a PhD in April 2002. I keep on wanting to say 2022, but that's of course the way we say dates at the moment. In April 2002, and starting another PhD in October 2003. That time was invaluable for me, and I worked in industry. I worked in the family business at home, and it was during that period of time that I realized that, yes, I did want to go back to research. I did want to give it another go, and I wanted to be more, let's say, calculated with the choice I made and where I studied and what I was going to do. And in that year, I decided, well, I need funding, so let's see if I can get funding. And I applied for a research grant, a postdoctoral research grant in not a postdoctoral, a PhD research grant in Ireland, which I was very fortunate to get. And that opened the doors up to a role back in my old university with my former supervisor from my project on galaxy formation. But then, to complicate matters, I also got another offer to do another PhD in Dublin. So I had now two offers, both funded, both with the same funding, both for the same duration of time, planned duration of time, that is, and in two different fields. So one of them was back in astrophysics, and the other one was in, I would say, statistical physics is what I would call it. Soft matter statistical physics is what I was looking at. And I, perhaps with an eye on what had happened in my astrophysics experience beforehand, decided to go for the soft matter project. And I think I would have got similar experiences out of both, but not, of course, not knowing how the other one would have turned out because I didn't pick it. I think that I, looking back, made the right decision. Now, there's other things that happened during my PhD that affected the second PhD, which I did finish, but it was an adventure and definitely not a linear journey. But when I look back at it, at that one, I also think I made the right decision.
Coming back to quitting your first PhD, today it's a kind of a taboo topic. Quit your PhD, as you say. There are expectations. There's family counting on you. There are friends who Yeah, I don't know. They expect probably like you started PhD, it means you are getting out of it when you have your diploma. How was it 20 years ago to quit and deal with it?
I didn't feel any peer pressure from anybody. I mean, I just told people, yeah, I'm going to quit this PhD. And I'm very fortunate in terms of the family and friends around me. There was nobody saying, oh, would you not just stay and see it out? Or could you not do at least a year? And that comment was coming from people who didn't understand the system. They said, oh, could you not just do a year and see what happens? But, there's, as I mentioned earlier on, you have financial considerations, you've got time considerations. You also have to think about being fair and just for yourself and for people on your side, but also people at the university level as well. I think I was fortunate. I think I was very fortunate. I do know of situations with people over the years since then who I have come across at universities in both Ireland and the Netherlands who were not so fortunate and who had to deal with situations that I didn't. And that was the added pressure and expectation placed upon them to follow the linear trajectory from bachelor to PhD and onwards. And if they didn't follow that particular path, it was seen as a huge mistake or a grave error or a career implosion. And that would reflect on not only themselves, but also on those that are closest to them. And I think it's also a cultural thing. I think there are many countries where quitting something as prestigious as a PhD is to certain cultures is seen as being a huge, I don't want to say maybe the right phrase is a huge impact on someone's character in a negative way, that is. And that someone is then seen and labeled as a quitter. I don't have any problems with someone saying that I was a quitter in terms of my first PhD, because I have no regrets, zero regrets about leaving that particular position. And I think that we live in a society where people quit their jobs all the time. People decide, I'm going to leave a role because it's not for me. I don't like the work. I don't like the environment. I don't like the salary. I don't like my boss. And these are all excuses that people will use in terms of leaving a position in any other area, particularly in industry. But for some reason in academia, if you decide that you want to quit a PhD, or if you want to leave a tenured role or a tenure track role, it's like a forbidden door that you can't walk through. And I don't know why that's there, because PhD is just a job. If you don't like your job and you're not enjoying it, and it's affecting your physical health, your mental health, your well-being, your relationships with both friends, family, with your partner, whoever that is, then you don't need it.
I agree. Maybe I shared this already, but I never seriously considered quitting, but there are these moments when they are really harsh. And with a friend of mine, we were saying, oh, the best thing about having a job is that you can quit anytime. So there's not this pressure, if you quit your job, it's like, okay, you quit your job, you're looking for a next job. That's a normal thing. But if you quit your PhD, it's like, oh my God, what are you going to do? How are you going to justify yourself?
Yeah. And when you quit a job, you're leaving a salary behind you. Invariably you're leaving, if you've been through university and you've done a bachelor's and a master's, and if you've done a PhD and then you're in a role and you leave it, you're leaving a salary behind. It's probably a good salary, depending on what industry you're in and what field you're in. But, with a PhD, and invariably people who are doing a PhD already have a bachelor's degree and already have a master's degree. And you're also, in comparison, definitely in the Netherlands probably isn't the case, but in Ireland for sure, and they're trying to correct this, I do know that, to make sure that the salaries for researchers is on a par with cost of living. And when I was doing my PhD, I was fine. But right now, I see now the financial pressures placed on PhD researchers in other countries that don't have the same, let's say, salary scales that they do have in the Netherlands. And somebody leaves a PhD and suddenly they've gone from little money to absolutely zero. And then they're also trying to deal with the implications that it could have for their relationships with those people who expected this from them because it's either a cultural thing or it's a family tradition or it's just this internal drive that the family should have or people should have in a certain group, trying to keep up with people to be like that. And all of these things weigh on people. And I think it blows it up to be bigger than it actually should be. That person, and it's very easy for me to say this, I think in the modern world, things have changed. As I say, 20 years ago was different for me. But now there's so much pressure on people because you see so many people on social media, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, doing things, being something else, being present, sharing what people they're doing, sharing their stories, sharing their research. And you see it and you feel pressure to also be like them. So if your friends that you went to college with all got PhDs, you feel that I want to be like them, so I want to get a PhD too. But that's not a good reason to do a PhD. And also a good reason to do a PhD, I need to, I want to make sure that my family are proud of me. Family are going to be proud of you no matter what you do. As long as you're not doing anything illegal, your family will be very proud of you no matter what you do. And you don't have to do a PhD to get that. And it's just leaving a position. That's all. You're just leaving a job. And then you're going to go find another job. And the skills you'll have in that role will be transferable. The things you've learned will be transferable. I work with people at the university in Eindhoven. I work with one or two people who have left PhD positions and they have zero regrets. Absolutely zero. In the same way that I have zero regrets of leaving my first one. None at all. And they did it for the right reasons. They did it for themselves. And they did it because, they looked at what was best for them and those around them as well. And I know that in every university, in every department, every group, in any country, there are people who are looking internally and questioning whether they want to be doing what they're doing at that very moment in time. And I think many of them are afraid to listen to themselves or allow themselves to reflect on the doubt because of all the pressures that are placed on them to finish.
Yeah. Unfortunately, taking into account how are you gonna, deal with it and justify yourself in front of the others, just because based on I think it's based on your expectation, what you think others expect of you, if that makes sense what I'm saying. It's you think that people think that you should do something. It's like a twisted, twisted loop, which does not serve anybody. Ultimately, people are going to forget if you quit or didn't quit or what you did with your life, as long as you're happy. But if they see you miserable and they see you miserable in 5 years, they're going to remember the fact that you're miserable, not the fact that you stayed at your PhD.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And you shouldn't stay in something if it doesn't make you happy. I mean, there are people who are in relationships that don't make them happy. You shouldn't be in those relationships. And a PhD is kind of like a relationship. It's give and take.
Yes.
And you are in a commitment to this relationship. But the great thing is that with relationships, it's not necessarily a prison sentence. And if it's not for you, you can always leave. And the relationship you have with your PhD can be a good one and it can be a bad one. And if it's a bad one, then it's time to think about that relationship and to see whether or not it's something you really want to invest in to try and change. And people can change it and you can change how you are in that position. But sometimes it can't be changed or it's unsalvageable. And people stay in those roles to the detriment of themselves because it can affect their mental well-being, their physical well-being, and it can also affect their potential to move on to the next position in a positive manner. So whatever comes afterwards and finding that next step can be negatively affected by the fact that someone has stuck with something for longer than they should have.
Mm-hmm. Well, in your case, it sounds like you were very happy when you switched to the second PhD. You said that...
I was, yeah.
And
I was very happy.
I don't know the details of that story, but what fascinates me actually, the setting, how I met you, is as a science communicator here at TUE. So how did this transition all the way from PhD to you being a science communicator happen?
Yeah, that's didn't hope happen overnight. That's for sure. So I undertook my second PhD at the University of Limerick in Ireland. I started that in October 2003, and I definitely took the scenic route. I took a very interesting trajectory through it. There were numerous delays and time issues in relation to it, and I ended up completing it, officially defending in October 2010, but really had the thesis finished by, I can remember the start of the World Cup in 2010 in South Africa, having a full copy of my thesis, a full draft done. So it was done in June 2010. As far as I was concerned, that was the day I finished. And thereafter, it was just changing and modifying and moving things around, which took about 2 or 3 months. But it was written then, and I defended in October 2010. There are many reasons why it took this time. And of course, this is down to various factors, and you don't want to be blaming any one individual, but they all come together into one thing. And one thing I would say is that from my point of view, I had something that came up in my personal life at that time. I went through a breakup, and it derailed me for about 6 or 7 months. So I wasn't fully focused on what I was doing, and that really did affect me. And then once I started to get back into things, that was fine. But then my funding ran out. So then I had to take a part-time job, which I was very fortunate to be able to do. And it was a job at the university as well. And it was one I really enjoyed. And it was running a learning center called the Science Learning Center at the University of Limerick. And this is where I started to really see another side of science and communication and education. So I think this was probably kind of the seed that ended up taking me down this science communication road. Added to that as well, another delay. And my promoter, just before I moved to the Netherlands, said to me as we were having a drink, he said, look, I was head of the department at the time, and he had a lot of time commitments, as he mentioned. And he said, look, if he hadn't had that role, perhaps it would have cut a year off the time. And that's fine. I appreciated him saying that, and but at the same time, when I look back at it, I'm very happy with what I did in that PhD, and I have the thesis. It's at home in Ireland. I have it with me here as well in the Netherlands, and I can't say I've ever picked it up and read it ever since I wrote it. I have flicked through it, and I always remember thinking, it caused me a lot of pain in terms of long hours and getting everything done. But I look at it now and I flick through it and go, I actually enjoyed that. That was really, really interesting and stimulating. But it was at the end of that period of my PhD that I ended up veering into the world of more science education and science outreach. So I was involved in a center that was based at the University of Limerick in relation to towards activities in education at primary level, at secondary level, at university level. And I was involved in a number of projects there. And this started to really kind of switch me on to the idea of science communication and science education. And it's funny because I kind of put a stop on that. Not like a planned stop. It was kind of this yearning I wanted to do to get back into fundamental research. So I started looking for postdocs, and I applied all over Europe, and I got a job offer from the University of Twente in November 2011. And I accepted it. I said, I'd love to come over. I actually had 2 job offers the same week, one from Galway and one from the Netherlands, but I wanted to undertake the international experience. So I moved to the Netherlands in February 2012 as a postdoc in Enschede at the University of Twente. And the difference, I'll always say this, the difference between moving to England when I was 21, 22 and moving to the Netherlands when I was 32 is very hard to actually properly measure. I was far more mature. I was more in tune with what I wanted. I knew exactly why I was there. I even took the position blind. I didn't even visit Enschede beforehand. I just said, yeah, let's do it. let's do it. Let's give it a go. And I came over there very positive, loved the work, loved the research, loved the area, got on very well with the group, with my the boss. Very, very nice group to work in terms of the work I did with him, and published papers out of it as well. So, and that was great. And it was just at the end of that postdoc, I was moving into my second postdoc, which was in Eindhoven. And it was just around then where I started to think about the science communication world a bit more. And the reason is that, and you can see some of the stuff behind me on the shelf, there's a Tony Stark figure there. There's like a little kind of M and an A, and there's part of an R up there. That's Marvel. And one of the big things I'm interested in is superheroes. And I always was fascinated by, and this is before the films were really, really big. So I was always fascinated by the TV series that were there, some of the early films and the comic books, and about what the real science was behind what you see and what you read about. So I started to do active research on superheroes and the science behind them. This was like a part-time thing. This was a hobby. This was, people say they have hobbies that involve like playing guitar. I play the guitar, I run, but I also was doing superhero science research on the side in my spare time. And this then led to me writing and self-publishing a book. So I self-published a book called Secrets of Superhero Science. And I put it out there, and it was a success. And it opened up doors that I didn't think were there. And I was able to go and speak at schools, speak at science festivals, and go to companies even and talk about this stuff. And this was the venture, the opening adventure into the world of science communication for me. And any skills that I developed in science communication were all developed through my own experiences. I didn't follow any courses. I didn't particularly have any mentors, I'm going to be honest about it. And maybe if we had a mentor, it would have been very beneficial to the process. It might have speeded up things a little bit. And it was then during that second postdoc that I really started to push the science communication. I wrote a second book in the same year, 2016. I wrote a book in 4 months about Santa Claus and science of Santa Claus. So Secret Science of Santa Claus. And I loved writing that book. Every Christmas, I get asked to do talks and to talk about the science of Santa Claus. Because he's a fantastic individual who accomplishes some amazing feats on Christmas Eve. But science and engineering is at the forefront of what Santa Claus does on that particular evening. It's just quite extraordinary what he achieves. And then 3 years later, I wrote another book called How to Build an Iron Man Suit. And that book, as it says, it's all about building an Iron Man suit and how you would approach it and the technologies you would need and all the subsystems you'd have to think about. And I just absolutely loved it. And I love going out and talking about this stuff and spreading the word. So when I was coming to the end of my last postdoc, which was in Delft, and I was doing research on fluidized bed reactors, which are used to produce biofuels, and they process biomass. And during my last few months, I got involved in projects that combined my interest in the world of superheroes and science, but also with the societal impact of the technologies that we see in those. So I was supervising groups of students on multidisciplinary projects in relation to exoskeleton suits, in relation to other types of wearable technologies, in relation to genetic engineering, for example, a field I'm not in, but I have read the papers and read the books on it, find it absolutely fascinating. And suddenly, I'd opened up doors into all these different worlds because of my interest in something that was written by, or characters created by people 60, 70, 80, 90 years ago. So that was my door into all of this, into the world of science communication, was superheroes. And it still is very much part of what I do in science communication. And that's how I ended up in science communication. It wasn't a dream. I don't think Barry from 2005 thought about becoming a science communicator. But it became very obvious to me, particularly during my second and third postdoc, that this was a sign on a road. This was a turn that I couldn't ignore, and I had to take it.
Yeah, and it sounds like you had this idea of staying in academia, so you went the academic path, like PhD, postdoc, maybe with the idea of becoming a professor?
I did indeed, yes. So while I still in my head had this idea I was going to follow that path of science communication, I always wondered how big a path that would be for me. So I was always going to have it as part of my future career. It was just a question of how big that would be, whether it would be the main trajectory or the main track, or whether it would be something additional to what I was doing. And indeed, during my second postdoc, and I think maybe the end of my second postdoc and going into the third one, was when I was really started to look at, well, is the tenure track route open for me? And I was interested in doing that because I felt that this was the natural progression for me. And it was about finding a role or a position where I could achieve the things I wanted to do, both as a researcher in fundamental topics that could have high impact in society in relation to energy, in relation to sustainability, but also looking at how I could find a role that would allow me to explore further my interest in science communication, in reaching society, in communicating on complex topics. And that was something that I really, really wanted to find. And I did, in the end, 4 interviews for either for full tenure track roles or for a partial role. And I got none of them. And I have to say, if I'm brutally honest, and I remember the first time I got a no, I went to, I won't say the university, but I did an interview at the university. And I do know that the panel of 9 people in front of me, 50% of them saw the value in having someone like me who has this alternative, creative view towards communication and education, but also has the technical ability and know how to do technical research, perhaps not at the same level of productivity as other people, mainly because I was interested in the communication element. And 50% valued that, but 50% of the committee thought that that side wasn't valuable. And that's such a, it was interesting feedback to receive. It was slightly disappointing. I got to be honest, a day later, I was over it. I was like, yeah, whatever, that's fine. Everyone is entitled to their opinion. I accepted it. And I said, look, there's no point in thinking about what could have been. Let's think about what can be and what I can do and where I could go. And I think that that's detrimental, not necessarily not hiring me. I'm not saying that I would have saved the world, but what I think is detrimental is that in the academic world now, I feel that it's important that researchers have this ability to communicate and the ability to share their stories, not just with their peers, but also with people outside of their scientific fields in other areas of science and engineering, but also to do it in a very clear manner. And I'm going to be honest about it. I don't know many scientists, even at all the universities that I've worked at, who can do that. And I have been to many scientific conferences myself. And in the past, I've made all the mistakes that I try to avoid nowadays when I present. And there's no way I would say that was the best presenter in the world. I was horrific, absolutely horrific. I made the worst slides. I had the worst stories, and I was super nervous. I got better and better and better as things went on, but I always remember back to presentations that I gave in, for example, in Los Angeles at a conference in 2018. I think I presented very well, but I don't think my slides were good enough. I thought my stories were good, but I felt the visuals let me down. And I took all those lessons, and I when I get the chance to present at a conference in the future, which I really hope I do, because I still do research, I will present in that keynote science communicator approach towards presenting science, and I will abandon all the normal traditional components that apparently researchers should have in their presentations, because that's not communication. If you want to communicate with people, you've got to actually connect with them. And scientists at the moment, I think, on the whole, are struggling to connect with more and more people. They want to connect with more people. I think they're struggling to do that. Not all of them are struggling. Don't get me wrong. There's some great researchers out there doing it and who are science communicators. But for me, I think that needs to be addressed. And that's a long discussion about how I went from a PhD to a science communicator.
Yeah, just to add on to that, to me, it looks like it's a bit a cultural thing in general in Europe, that we don't put a lot of effort into developing these communication skills during our academic track. For example, I remember going to conferences, and when you see people from the US presenting, it's a totally different way. Because there is a bit of this cultural thing that you need to sell whatever you are doing. You know, you need to sell it, and it's not necessarily bad. It's not bad at all. You see, like, even I'm biased. I say it's not necessarily bad because we have this things like, you are selling, so like it does not land well. Whereas you need to connect with people, what you said. And unfortunately,
I completely agree. I completely agree what you say as well. I haven't spoken at American conferences that researchers based in the US, not all of them, of course, but some of them are charismatic when they present, and they're researchers. And I think that in Europe, there's a bit of a humility, perhaps, or a lot of people aren't comfortable about stepping out of their shell to present. And let's be honest about it. A lot of scientists are introverts. A lot of scientists are. Not many scientists are extroverts. Some scientists who are introverts can be an extrovert when they're presenting, but for the majority of the time, they're introverts. And that also is something that you also have to deal with, that some people don't feel they have to communicate like that. That they feel that they'll do it in their introverted way and that'll be enough for them because that's all they want to do. And they don't want to reach thousands and thousands of people. But I think because there's so much science out there, there are so many papers been published, there's so many people working in so many different areas. If you want to stand out, you have got to change how you talk and you've got to change how you communicate. And then you will stand out, not because your research is going to change the world, because your research will have an impact on something, but not everything. But it's because of you, the person who stands up in front of that audience and welcomes the audience, wants to connect with the audience, is very open, is homely, basically. Someone who is up there and creates a nice atmosphere for dialogue. And you stand a greater chance of being able to get that collaboration with that group you've always wanted to have, to work in that lab that perhaps is based in a country that you've always dreamed of working in, to work with people who challenge you, but also are beneficial to your research goals and research needs, to improve you as a person, and also to facilitate a very important process when it comes to research, and that is to be happy with what you're doing and enjoy what you're doing. And I think that there are a lot of people out there who miss that, who don't see science as being fun. I still do research, but I do research and write papers with no pressure, zero pressure. I don't have to do it. There is nobody telling me that I have to write papers. I have no obligation to do so. However, I want to do it because I love the process. I love doing research. I love collaborating with other people. And then when the time comes, I will love going out and sharing the stories at a scientific conference about what we did, and to do it in a way that brings everyone along, as many people as possible, with the story. So that at the end of the day, I want to talk to people afterwards. I don't want to alienate people beforehand.
One thing resonates in my head, like starting from the beginning, like from your story that you quit your first PhD, and then also in a way, you can say that you quit this initial idea of becoming a full professor or going the academic path, but you have reinvented this role of still being able to publish papers and do the research and stay in academia, but not really in the role that is designed for it.
Yes,
but you designed it.
I was very fortunate to find the role that I did at the Eindhoven University of Technology as a science communication officer. So I have my pulse on the advancements of research. I may not be actively involved in every advancement of research. That's absolutely impossible. But indeed, I find myself in a role in academia that I think many people would have thought was not possible. I didn't think existed 20 years ago. And suddenly I found myself in this role, which happens to be something that resonates with what I want to do and what I want to achieve. And I still hear about great research, and I still contribute to research. Perhaps not in the same way I did before, but that's fine too. And the previous paths that I thought I was supposed to follow and to walk down, I'm very happy that perhaps very happy is the wrong terminology. I would say that the fact that I didn't get those positions has not defined me. Absolutely not. And I've not let it define me. And that's because I know and I knew back then that there are other possibilities. And I know that whatever happens in the future, there are other things that I can do and plan to do and will do. And I can make those for myself, or things will come about. And whether you quit a PhD, whether you do a PhD in the first place, whether you do a postdoc, and that those kind of decisions shouldn't define who you are and shouldn't define where you go. And it's just a decision. It's like deciding to have apple juice or orange juice in the morning. I mean, I've played it down there a little bit there, but at the same time, it is just a decision. And that type of decision should not be the one that defines your life and defines who you are. And I don't let that type of decision, what I decided to do with my first PhD, the fact that I decided to do a second PhD, and the fact now that I've decided to embrace the world of science communication, those decisions, they don't necessarily define where I'll be and who I am. They guide what I do right now, but there are always other options. There are always other things to explore.
Definitely. And seeing you, like being happy where you are, and you could not have imagined this role 15 years ago, it's also a strong message to follow your internal motivation. Yeah. Some of the things that we were talking, like what other people are going to say, how the external factors are influencing. And there can be something, like how do you see stuff like this external push or external motivation, or whatever you see in the external world, versus the internal motivation and what you internally want. Yeah, I think the second one is the one that is sustainable. Like everything around you can change. You are going to change the country. You're going to change the people you're surrounded with, the mindset that is around you. Yeah. But what is in the core, it's really like your internal interests that are going to drive you no matter where you end up and what you end up doing.
Absolutely. And the one thing I would say to people is that you look at people and perhaps you have a sense of, and maybe the right word is jealousy, but the wrong word that could be the wrong word for some people. You see what other people are doing, your peers, people you know. And I'm not going to lie, I've seen friends, I've seen people I've worked with, and they've excelled. And you always wonder, could that have been me? Probably not. I mean, I'm very open and honest about who I am and what I am. I look at certain roles and I know that I'm a smart guy, but I'm probably not smart enough to do that. But it's not about intelligence. It's not about intelligence per se. But for me, what I realize is that there's always more to someone's situation. There's always more going on. So no matter what you see somebody doing or somebody achieving, and people are achieving great things, and it's fantastic to see people doing that. The one thing you should be looking at is not to look at it with envy, but to look at it as a learning opportunity. What can I learn from that person and what they've done to get to there? And what could they tell me about their journey? But also the other side of it is that for them to complete that journey, or for them to continue on that journey, they are making sacrifices that you don't know about. You have no idea the things that they are giving up, the things that they have had to put on hold, the things that they have had to turn their back on. And that's something that you have to keep in mind. The thing is, they have decided to sacrifice certain things, but would you be able to, or strong enough, or want to sacrifice those same things to follow that same path? And everyone's path is different, and everyone has different things going on. So I really think people have to look at that as well. And there's just the social media world makes it so difficult to avoid this, and that is comparison. And the thing is, people on LinkedIn, I see it all the time, getting their PhDs. Oh, I defended my PhD. It's brilliant. Congratulations. Fantastic. But it's for people who are peers of those individuals who are looking at this on LinkedIn. They're seeing all these people getting their PhDs and defending. And, you know, perhaps for them, there's something in their head just whispering to them and saying, you have to do this because they did it as well. So if they could do it, you could do it. But the other side of the coin is you could have doubt about whether you can do it or not. That's one thing. But then there's doubt about whether you should be doing it in the first place.
Exactly. It's also passing it through your filter and asking, is this what I want? Because we are very easily influenced. And also, as we are very visual beings, having social media does not help, you know, to have all this input and you see all these images. Plus, it's one moment in time. You know, you see somebody posting, I finished my PhD. It's like years of hard work and who knows what lies behind that. And you see this one moment in time and you're like, oh, yeah, you know, you're like, I want to be standing there and holding this diploma. And then what? Like, it's 5 minutes of holding the diploma. Do you really want
on the grander scheme? Yeah, it's a fraction of your life. That moment, if you're gaming for that, it's a fraction of your life. That should not define your life. Don't let that be the moment that says, yes, that's me. That's me right there. That photograph with that diploma is me. No, it's not. Yeah. You're the summation of everything that came before that.
Yeah. But I think we covered a bunch of things. Is there something else that you would like to add and say this is absolutely what everybody needs to hear?
I guess the only thing I would say to conclude is that maybe it's a cliche to say is that don't be afraid. I mean, that's a cliche when I say something like that, but listen to yourself. If there's something amiss, and particularly in the world of research, and you are saying it to yourself, then listen to yourself. So just and do that, absolutely. And if you are, by the way, if you are in research, I would wholeheartedly encourage you, as a former 100% researcher and now a 15%, maybe 20% researcher, what I can see now is the value of developing your communication skills is try and make those efforts to become a better communicator, because having better communication skills is not just about learning how to share your stories from your research with different audiences in a more effective way. It's about figuring out how you can communicate with your collaborators. It's about realizing that there are different ways to tell people about your research, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a poster, a paper, or a presentation.
Yeah, you can reinvent yourself and reinvent the way how you communicate, find your own style.
Yeah, absolutely. There's loads of ways to do it. And those three elements I mentioned, those poster, paper, and presentation, which are the three traditional elements when it comes to dissemination of research activity and findings, those all align with the traditional academic metrics. And I hope that the academic world will change. I really do. I hope that there will be a shift that will value people who can communicate, so that in the future, me telling researchers to go out and improve their communication skills is not just for, the ability to share their stories in a better way, but also that when it comes to their next role, wherever that is, whether it's in industry or whether it's in the academic world or elsewhere, that the communication skills that they've garnered and that they have collected and enhanced with practice are truly valued and are truly seen as a benefit to any organization moving forward.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If there was anything that you discovered or found remotely interesting, do share. I'm always curious to hear what is it that you resonated with. See you in the next episode.